In July this year, social media users in India were sharing an image of a dinosaur roaming in Delhi. While it's not the first time that wildlife rescuers in the capital city have received frantic calls mistaking monitor lizards for dinosaurs in their gardens, in truth, this wasn't even an unusual sighting. The animal is commonly found in many pockets of Delhi and its neighboring villages. Just like leopards are sighted in the IIT Bombay campus, elephants in Tezpur town, birds migrating across continents, or even octopuses right on our shores. When we think of wildlife, we often only think of pristine forests. We think of national parks, we think of sanctuaries, which are legally known as protected areas. But that same wildlife has always existed and thrived beyond the boundaries of protected areas. It lives much closer to us than we think. But what are protected areas? Simply put, these are wilderness areas that are protected by law for the welfare of wild animals and habitats. There are 5 categories of protected areas in India. Each varies by level of protection and the rules for what is allowed within each boundary. Some quick stats for you. There are 903 protected areas in India. But what does that translate to? 5% of our land area. That's just around the size of Andhra Pradesh. This fraction alone cannot and does not support all wildlife. And moreover, wild animals do not recognize political boundaries. An August 2020 government report says that populations of nilgai, sambar, wild pigs, golden jackals are found on peripheries and outside protected areas. In fact, striped hyenas are reported on peripheries and outside protected areas more than core areas. So, where else are these animals found? Well, the short answer, everywhere. An animal needs resources to survive: food, safety, shelter. And it makes its home wherever it finds these, whether it's in a national park or in our backyards.
I think India is so unique because we have grasslands, we have the marine landscape, we have high altitude grasslands, we have the evergreen tropical forests in the northeast, we have evergreen forests in the south, we have the desert, the arid landscape. We have everything in our country, and none of these ecosystems are devoid of humans.
Many of these ecosystems, vital for humans and animals alike, fall in urban, semi-urban or rural areas. Wetlands such as lakes and ponds right in the middle of our megacities are important homes and provide food and water for migratory birds, turtles, and many more species. For context, 40% of the world's plant and animal species breed in wetlands. And grasslands in areas such as outskirts of Pune city provide shelter to wolves and hyenas. And while those in Rajasthan host some of the last great Indian bustards. Even our busy coastline, farmlands, urban parks, these are all alive with wildlife. And because of this obvious overlap in human and animal spaces, interactions are to be expected. And they're most often not harmful to either party.
At my study site, the farmers have to go to switch on their pumps because the electricity comes only at some times.
Vidyatri was studying leopards in the rural cropland landscape of western Maharashtra.
So there was this dilapidated building, sugarcane on both sides, which was like 12 feet tall. So he was saying that he came walking and then suddenly he felt something looking at him. So he looked up, which was the only structure there. No people, no nothing. Okay. And there was a leopard sitting on top of that roof. Both of them looked at each other and the farmer said, I'm just going to look ahead. And he went, switched off his pump, came back, the leopard had gone. This is just an example, and there's so many others. Yeah, the Delhi thing, for instance, people calling it a dinosaur only shows the distance between the people and the animals. But in rural landscapes where this distance is much less and people and animals' lives merge with each other, it's much more common to see all this.
A study done across 1,200 square kilometers of tea garden dominated landscape in northern West Bengal revealed surprising data about shared spaces. It found that over 55% of the area was being used by elephants and a whopping 80% was used by leopards. This, in addition to the small protected area pocket in the study region.
So, in my experience, these animals have been able to persist in human use areas because they've adapted incredibly well, both behaviorally as well as in terms of their resource requirements.
That's Orithro Shetri, one of the authors of the study and a wildlife biologist studying large mammals outside protected areas.
So, inside protected forest, you can see that leopards may be moving during the day also. In human use areas, almost entirely leopards are nocturnal, which means they are only active when people are not active.
Despite these adaptations, an interaction can turn complicated. Animals are killed sometimes just for being seen in human dominated areas, or while crossing railway tracks or roads, and sometimes as retaliation for loss of crops, property, and in some cases, life. This, despite the fact that many species are actually protected under India's Wildlife Protection Act, regardless of where it is present, in a protected area, in a field, or our backyards. But it can be a challenge to implement the law outside a protected area, perhaps due to a lack of human resource to control situations, or a lack of awareness about the animals, or a lack of data itself.
For example, if you talk about birds, people will rarely attack birds out of fear. If it were a snake, for example, it would evoke a threat response from people and it would be attacked. So a lot of it is based on our cultural beliefs around those species, and they attack only species which they do not understand or they perceive a threat from that animal.
But it's not just the wildlife, but also its habitat outside protected areas that is under threat. Because we equate forests as spaces dense with trees, grasslands, wetlands, and deserts are often mistaken for degraded forests or wastelands or land available for human use. And this is a problem because a major science and policy report cites land use change, not climate change, as the most forceful driver of ecosystem collapse and biodiversity loss. An Indian government report itself says that many protected areas have become like small islands in a vast sea of unsustainable land use. As habitats shrink to make way for infrastructure and other projects that exclude scientific and ecological data, both wildlife and local communities that depend on these spaces for livelihood suffer. This leads to the local decline of some animals or an increase in the struggle for space, which leads to conflict. For example, otters are vanishing from Himalayan rivers and elephants are increasingly entering farmland across the country. These are just two of numerous such examples. But there's hope yet. For instance, in July 2020, a village in Tamil Nadu switched off its streetlights for 35 days to protect a magpie robin's nest found inside the switchboard. Humans are fairly skilled at teamwork when they put their hearts and mind to it, and that has created some impact.
For decades, I could say, the onus of protecting wildlife technically was on the Wildlife and Forest Department. However, since we are realizing now that a large proportion of these species actually exists outside forest boundaries, beyond the purview of these forest departments, hence it is also important to engage other stakeholders who can affect biodiversity conservation.
Let's say a snake enters a home in a rural area. Villagers, rescue workers, forest departments, NGOs, they'll all come together to diffuse the situation without harm caused to either party. In a busy urban space as well, the involvement of multiple partners has proved successful, even when the animal in question is a big cat. The surrounding areas of Mumbai's Sanjay Gandhi National Park are a great example. Mumbai is home to around 47 leopards, a rarity for a metropolis of this scale where the animals regularly step out of the park.
It's not that we want to fill all our areas with wild animals, but the problem that happened in Bombay was earlier they were removing, and that was actually creating more conflict and killing people. Because you remove a leopard from here and you leave it somewhere else, we found that the attacks on people near that release site increase. It has a society here, mothers live near their daughters and so on. And you're totally disrupting all that, right?
Human-leopard conflict peaked in the early 2000s, leading to an initiative called Mumbaikars for SGNP. Vidya Atreya was part of the initiative. This collaborative effort between the media, citizens, the forest department, and the police led to more awareness, coexistence, and effective crowd-controlled rescue operations. Atreya says that it is this one-size-fits-all approach of everyone working together that radically decreased conflict over the last decade in Mumbai. Acceptance and understanding of wildlife outside protected areas will lead to less fear and more inclusion, and this can then pave the way for long-term strategies and policies.